Optimism in Action is produced in collaboration with KAZU, your NPR station for the Monterey Bay area of California. You'll find this episode and archived episodes at kazu.org/sidebar.
Community colleges can become talent brokers for the shifting job needs of their communities. Like in my own community, things are shifting dramatically in terms of what are the industries that animate the region. Northern Virginia Community College, they are becoming the hub. They're working with Amazon, they're working with the AI providers, the data centers. What do you need? We'll help, we'll train. I see this as kind of an exciting time. Change is always exciting, depending on how you look at it.
That's today's guest on Sidebar, Kathleen deLaski, author and founder of the Education Design Lab.
Sidebar is brought to you by Monterey College of Law, San Luis Obispo College of Law, Kern County College of Law, and Empire College of Law, located in Santa Rosa.
Welcome to Sidebar, featuring conversations about optimism in action with lawyers and leaders inspiring change. And now your co-hosts, Jackie Gardina and Mitch Winnick.
Mitch, you and I are obviously, given our backgrounds, ardent supporters of higher education. But higher education has been front page news for the last several years, and not in a good way. The public is questioning the value of college. Affordability and student debt is front of mind. Technology, especially AI, is transforming the workforce, and it's not clear colleges are keeping up. The current administration has made reforming higher education a central policy initiative, including dismantling the Department of Education. There is a lot to talk about, and we have the absolute perfect guest to do that. Kathleen deLaski is an education and workforce designer as well as an author. She founded the Education Design Lab in 2013, long before we were all talking about this, to help colleges begin the journey to reimagine higher education toward the future of work. In 2025, she published Who Needs College Anymore? Imagining a World Where Degrees Don't Matter, which I have to admit, the title struck a little bit of a dagger in my heart. Plus, she manages the deLaski Family Foundation, which has been a 25-year grant maker in education reform, well-being, sustainable agriculture, and the arts. But what's even more amazing is that in a previous career, Kathleen spent 20 years as a TV and then a digital journalist, including time as ABC News White House correspondent, followed by a political appointment as the first female Pentagon spokesperson. So she comes to us with a lot of background to help us fill in some of what's happening right now. So, Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us on Sidebar.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Who is that woman you're talking about?
Well, Kathleen, I hope that by the time we're finished this approximate 30 minutes, we will have completely solved the future of higher education. It appears to me that if anybody's able to lead us down that path, you're going to be at the head of that pack. So welcome to Sidebar.
Thank you. And can we just address the dagger right off the bat? I think everybody hears the title of my book and says, ouch, really? I mean, come on, Kathleen, you were a prime example of how most of us who would be having this conversation have been prime beneficiaries of the collegiate system. And so we'll get into that in our discussion. But let me just say, I am pro-college. I feel very strongly that college needs to expand its definition and address the people that it's leaving behind.
You had this amazing career as a journalist and then as a spokesperson, a political appointee. Then you started Education Design Lab. What kind of prompted that move?
I won't take you through the whole story, but I ended up at Sallie Mae in the 2000s. It was right at the point when college attendance was sort of skyrocketing. One of the things that was in my portfolio was managing the foundation. I started it up, actually, the corporate foundation. That's when I really became aware of how policy and college design, leave so many people behind. And then I was also around that same time appointed to the governing board of Virginia's largest public institution, public university, George Mason. I learned there too that, we had an extremely forward-leaning and innovation-oriented president and board, and yet our hands were so tied. The funding model and the accreditation model, frankly, the tenure model, had an impact or kind of a a dampening effect on how you could actually lean in to meet the needs of, what are learners asking for in the types of learning products, if we can use that word, which I know higher ed doesn't like us to think of college as a product. If you were running a business, you would think about the entire spectrum of an addressable market and how are you serving the different parts of that market with a segmentation strategy. I don't want to think of college as a product either, but I do think that we have to think about the human-centered needs of the 60% of folks who are not getting a four-year degree, while we have the messaging that is, you have to get a degree if you want to have a good job. I mean, that's changing all of a sudden. The message, I think AI is doing many good things, many bad things to kind of our stress levels in society. Maybe it's about to shake us up in a really big way. But one good thing it's calling into question that narrative that you have to go to college to get a good job, and not necessarily in a positive way, but potentially in a negative way.
And Kathleen, one of the things I did before I got back into higher education and legal education was I spent 15 years as a management consultant. So the words you're using are very familiar to me from the business side. I don't think there's anything wrong with having outcome expectations or outcome measurements or outcome designs. And higher ed has never really used that model of you come in, warehouse for 4 years, and you get a piece of paper. There's never been that connection that I think you've worked so hard to define between the purpose of the education and the work that is the outcome of what they can do as a career. Is that a fair statement about where we really do need to focus a lot of our effort?
Right. In fact, I devote one chapter of the book to sort of asking the question, or kind of a thought exercise. What if colleges thought of themselves as it being in their job description to deliver you at the front door of your first job? Most colleges would say, no, we're preparing you generally for life and for a career in a particular, major, but it's not our job to even get you the internship. I mean, that's starting to change all of a sudden. I think suddenly people are realizing, wow, I mean, if we promise that we'll get you internships, our enrollment goes up. I profile one college that's been amazing at that, Northeastern University, with their co-op program. Just that one marketing technique, if you will, and one value add has made them one of the hardest colleges in America to get into, because they're providing you experiences where you actually weave together school and work. And that's what parents are asking for their kids. That's what students, for the most part, are interested in doing, because it takes the pressure off of them in an age when it's becoming harder and harder for students to personally network and go out and get that, either an internship or that first job. The idea that college is just it's built in to college. It's a hot idea right now. In fact, one of the universities in my city just added this feature, which is American University.
The difference between when many of us went to college and even at a private university, you might spend a few $1,000s a year. Maybe you spent $10,000 a year. But where some undergraduate degrees can be hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, do you think that we've become more acutely demanding of what they do for that money because of the money? Or do you think systemically we should just take the money out of it and solve the process and content of education?
Yeah, that's a really good way to ask that question, because how tied is the drop in the reputation of the degree, all the surveys that say college isn't worth it. If it was the price it was when maybe you or I went to college in the late 70s, if it was that price, the reputation would be positive. That's why the term ROI, return on investment, is it worth the money? So yes, I think affordability is the top reason, but I think the second reason is really a relevance issue, and particularly since COVID, one high school described it as fewer students having what they would call an academic identity, seeing themselves as, wanting to hit the books for 4 more years and sit in a desk.
I want to pivot to not just the apprenticeship type piece, but what are being called credentials or micro-credentials, stackable, whatever they might be called. Not everyone understands or knows what they are. So when they hear that in the ethers of the public, what does it mean as compared to a degree?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So one of my chapters focuses on employers who are actually hiring students or learners without degrees. And the two things that show the most promise as signals, besides a degree, are apprenticeships called short-term credentials. The ones that are most effective of those short-term credentials are industry recognized certification or certificate. And the word certificate's getting thrown around a lot lately. In many cases, it just means a shorter version of college that might be, like boot camp style. But an industry recognized certification is one where at least a company, AWS or Microsoft or Cisco, actually has a test, like a proctored test that you have to take, and there are courses that prep you for those. In some cases, entire industries have gotten together to create those certifications. As I say in the book, the one that's done the best job at this is probably the cybersecurity industry, because they were so desperate for expertise that colleges didn't know how to deliver. I tell the story of a high school student in my area in Northern Virginia who started taking elective classes in his high school, career and technical education classes, which are more and more of those are being offered now. He got 3 or 4 certifications in data security. He went online to get a summer job. He thought he would go to community college, and he ended up getting picked up by AWS summer after high school, and then was thinking about going to community college, but he kept getting promotions, and then he got another job as a software engineer. So he got intercepted, on the way to community college as someone who said he didn't have an academic identity. High school enrollment in college courses is actually the fastest growing form of college enrollment. And these short-term certificates are also fueling, they're now saying, oh, college enrollment is recovering. It's recovering because of these other forms of enrollment, not degrees so much.
Kathleen, it seems it's not just the move from degrees to credentials that is transforming colleges. How do you see AI influencing the future of post-secondary education?
I'll put it in the context of the course that I'm about to teach starting next semester, which is called How to Get Hired in the Age of AI. I'm teaching it at George Mason University. Understanding the tasks that will either be augmented or appropriated, by the bots. We have to help students gain the baseline expertise so that they can basically skip over the first rung of the job ladder to get to the second rung, so that they can be managers of bots rather than victims of the bots taking their roles. I'm setting out to try to help in the various fields that my students will be in, and I'm bringing in experts, and we're going to be interviewing employers in a design sprint to try to figure out, what signals does the employer need, or what do you need in your portfolio and your resume to demonstrate that you're going to be an asset in this age rather than a passover.
We talk about workforce development, which is absolutely important, but we aren't talking about higher education institutions as pillars of our democracy and education as a bulwark against tyranny. And I don't want to lose that by just focusing on workforce development. And the other piece is the amazing amount of research and innovation that emerges from universities. So how do the kind of short-term credentials, skipping over kind of a college degree to maybe just focus on workforce development, affect those two pieces?
It's my biggest concern. It's kind of a race to the most specific skill that you could learn or earn. And then what about those fabulous courses that you're not doing in general education that are supposed to more prepare you to be a citizen of the world, or even historical context? It's so important to understand what came before us and what could go wrong. I think that gets handled in 2 ways. One is to actually bake in additional certifications around what you might call the durable skills. So critical thinking being the most important one that employers ask for. Second one being probably collaboration, empathy. You're not necessarily going to study world history in that class, but you are going to be asked to look at different sources for sources of truth, to analyze fact bases and draw conclusions. lots of people are working on creating shorter term credentials than 2 years of your bachelor's degree, because that's the problem, is that yes, everybody agrees that the things you described, Jackie, would be nice to have, but not at the price. People are actually saying, well, no, I want the scaled back package with just the technical skills that get me the job. I mean, we all know that employers also want the general skills, the durable skills, as we're trying to call soft skills now. We haven't figured out how to give people a more streamlined version of. So that's one solution. And the second solution, I'll say this quickly. Yes, some people should still get the 4-year degree leading to the terminal PhD degree. So we need the researchers. The big questions is, are American born students signing up for the long form? We're seeing a lot of news right now that they're not. International enrollment's down 17%. And those were this year in 2025. Those were a lot of the students that were in it for the long haul to become our scientists. That's all very worrisome.
On that note, if we kind of flip the narrative as you started to do a little earlier, and we talk about what do the students want? What does a 14-year-old or a 13-year-old want as they're going into high school, picking those, in some cases, college prep classes or preparatory classes that would set the pathway? It's a little hard to put a finger on that, but it seems to be that there's some concerning dialogue that we're picking up from these young kids, that they say, we don't know where the future is going. We don't know what we want to do. It's not just, I don't know what skill or job. It's, I'm not sure what the future is for me, period, writ large. Do we have to marry high school and then college or post-high school courses and direction closer together to try to get this to all make sense? Because it seems to me that K-12 is its own world. Then you've got college, you've got community college, you've got trade schools. I mean, we still have all of these silos. It doesn't seem to me that we're moving much closer to integrating all of that in a more integrated discussion of education of the individual.
I actually see some signs of bridging the silos. I make the comment in my book about how the learner journey, it has evolved into a series of blind handoffs between K-12 and either higher ed or at work. And there's no connective tissue between these silos. And I do think that some things are starting to happen to change that. I mean, one is this dual enrollment that I mentioned. Now, I think it's 2.5 million high school students now are actually in college. And so it's kind of forcing the high school to talk to the college. And now, I mean, we just announced at the Education Design Lab an RFP where we want to work with states and their community colleges and their high schools to design pathways that are really kind of stacking to connect the dots, where you could have a first credential. It's a stepladder approach. You could have a first credential in high school that allows you to either go straight to work, but you would know, it would be clear to you what the next rung would be to move up the ladder and potentially get a degree. We see that happening, and it's interesting that it's crept up on the policy world. I mean, nobody realized that now we have 1 out of every 5 high school students is in college. In some states, it's more than 50% of college students are high schoolers. In Indiana and Idaho, actually, I just wrote about this. I think that there are a number of efforts now at the state level to connect the data, because that's obviously key, and then to connect the programming. And the next thing we haven't done very well that I think people are waking up to is we have to connect the narratives, right? To your point, like, what are we saying to the 14-year-old? What do we tell the kids? The jobs we were saying, major in computer science, right, 10 years ago, and they all did. I mean, computer science majors were up like 20%. This year, they're down 8%. It's because everybody's reading, the headlines about AI. We're kind of in the eye of the cyclone right now. So I think we have to, not be too hard on ourselves in terms of our career navigation efforts with young people, because we just have to recognize that it's going to be clearer in the next 2 years, I think, what we should be telling, how to connect the dots for young people.
Wow, there's so many threads to pull on in that answer, but I'm going to pull on one, which is higher education policy in particular. So what you're doing at the Education Design Lab is organic, community-based, let us help you, community college, high school etc., build something that has meaning for your community. But what we've seen from the federal government right down is a lot of tap down. No one questions that higher education needs reform. The so-called Compact for Excellence in Education came down from the Trump administration with lots of thoughts about affordability and other things that I think everyone would acknowledge needs to be addressed. What do you think of the federal government becoming involved in the finances or dictating particular things that should happen within higher education?
Well, one of the things that has recently been dictated by Congress, and I call for this in the book, people are calling it workforce Pell. It's a funding policy. And now Congress has passed, as part of the big, beautiful bill, that colleges, community colleges, or any colleges really, but community colleges are the ones most likely to jump on this. They're Pell students, so low income students can qualify for free tuition for courses as short as 8 weeks. And that has never been the case. You had to be part of a degree program before. And that will drive, I think, a fair amount of innovation in short-term credentialing and the evaluation of it, because that's been missing. That's exciting.
Support for Optimism in Action comes from the Monterey College of Law, a nonprofit law school serving the Monterey Bay region with evening classes on campus or in a hybrid online format. More details and applications available at montereylaw.edu. That's montereylaw.edu.
And I think people would be surprised to find out that in some instances it's reported that 10 to 15% of current enrolled college students are experiencing homelessness. They're living in their cars. They're living in tents.
In the education realm, community colleges don't tend to have fundraising arms, but what some of them have created is basic needs emergency funds, which can be a way to get to families that are food insecure or that might be having to stop their education just because of a car breaks down or they can't afford the child care for this month. And so I have found that a useful way and recommend to other friends to give to these community college funds, because if you think about breaking the cycle of poverty, it's the education and training that allows you to provide for your family. A very small investment for the individual or the individual family can go a long way to helping that family get out of the cycle of poverty to a new life. That's why I got into education reform, was because that was my theory of change.
Kathleen, you have been kind of at the forefront of change in higher education, and I think to be that kind of futurist, you have to be optimistic. So let's end with the question of what makes you optimistic about the future of, I'm not going to call it higher education, I'm going to call it post-secondary education. What makes you optimistic about the future of that?
I am a optimist by nature because I look at a problem and I think of all the ways we can innovate through it. Higher education institutions still have the trust of the American people. We see that because they're still coming to college. They're just asking colleges to do more things. Community colleges can become talent brokers for the shifting job needs of their communities. Like in my own community, things are shifting dramatically in terms of what are the industries that animate the region. Northern Virginia Community College, they are becoming the hub. They're working with Amazon, they're working with the AI providers, the data centers. What do you need? We'll help, we'll train. George Mason, the local university, is taking people to the next step and doing the research. So I see this as kind of an exciting time. Change is always exciting, depending on how you look at it. We have the people, we're getting the data in place to kind of see how do we need to serve the community, how do we need to build GDP and our local economies. The tool set is coming into focus at just the right time.
Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us today on Sidebar. I learned a ton.
Thank you.
Well, that goes to the lifelong learning aspect of all of this, doesn't it, Jackie? Well, Kathleen, thank you. This was exactly what I wanted to do, look at some of the future thinking about higher ed, some of the difficult issues that I think we have to decide as a society and as a community but most importantly as educators so that we can step forward and meet some of these challenges.
One of the things that's happening right now is something that's happened in higher education cycles before. When we moved from an agrarian economy to an industrial economy, higher education had to dramatically change what it taught, how it taught, to prepare the next generation of young people to enter a very different economy. And now we've moved from an industrial economy to a knowledge economy, one where knowledge is kind of duplicating itself every 12 hours. And so actually teaching knowledge isn't possible because it's changing so rapidly. So higher education has to once more transform itself to respond to the needs of a new economy and a new society. So I'm hopeful, like Kathleen is, that it's got the history and the background and the tools to be successful in that transformation.
Jackie, as Kathleen was talking about it, I was thinking about my family's transition through education. And like many people, I'm of an immigrant background back at the turn of the century. And those are individuals who came to work as tradespeople here in the United States. And the very first thing they did is start directing their children towards education. There was never any question that my grandparents were going to have my parents go to college as a pathway to their contribution to society and the betterment of the family. I cannot remember a time when it wasn't expected that I was going to go to college and graduate school. That was just part of the family narrative. And yet, we look at Kathleen's book, Who Needs College Anymore? Imagining a future where degrees won't matter. And yet she's saying that's a positive look at how should college restructure itself. And it makes me step back and say, I need to rethink how we're thinking about where college fits into these family narratives and the community's narrative and the country's narrative, because we need other things. Many people don't need college for their upward mobility because the previous generations have established that status for them. Now, the questions we're asking are, is it return on investment? Is it getting outcomes that we need so that it'll support not just the individual's career, but the needs of society? As I've talked about before, I'm on a hospital board. We desperately need professionals at every single level of healthcare, and yet we don't see the enrollment numbers going into those fields. So I'm very worried about that. And Kathleen makes us think about all those things, and for that reason, I was thrilled to have her on Sidebar.
Once again, I want to thank everyone who joined us today on Sidebar. And as always, Mitch and I would love to know what's on your mind. You can reach us at SideBarMedia.org.
Sidebar would not be possible without our producer, David Eakin, who composes and plays all of the music you hear on Sidebar. Thank you also to Dina Dowsett, who creates and coordinates Sidebar's social media marketing.
Optimism in Action is produced in collaboration with KAZU, your NPR station for the Monterey Bay area of California. You'll find this episode and archived episodes at kazu.org/sidebar.